The quickest way to underestimate someone is to mistake their job for their worth. On a rainy Thursday evening, Hawthorne House glowed like a jewel in the heart of Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across polished marble floors, while soft piano music drifted gently through the dining room. Every table was occupied by people whose names often appeared on magazine covers, corporate websites, or television interviews. Investors discussed mergers over expensive wine. Attorneys celebrated courtroom victories with aged bourbon. Entrepreneurs toasted new partnerships beneath ceilings decorated with handcrafted wood and shimmering glass. It was the kind of restaurant where reservations were secured months in advance and where every detail was expected to be flawless. Among the silent rhythm of polished shoes and silver serving trays moved Claire Bennett, 28 years old, white. Blonde hair gathered neatly into a simple bun beneath the soft restaurant lighting. Calm blue eyes that rarely revealed more than quiet kindness. She wore a perfectly pressed black waitress uniform beneath a spotless white apron, moving through the dining room with steady confidence earned from years of paying attention to people rather than demanding attention from them. She greeted every guest with the same sincere smile, whether they ordered the most expensive steak on the menu or nothing more than a bowl of soup and hot tea. Her coworkers often wondered how she remembered so many names, favorite drinks, anniversaries, and birthdays without writing anything down. Claire never explained it. She simply believed people deserved to feel remembered. At exactly 7:15, the atmosphere shifted almost invisibly. The maitre d' straightened his jacket. Two managers quietly exchanged glances before walking toward the entrance. Several regular guests looked up from their conversations. Nathaniel Brooks had arrived. At 39 years old, Nathaniel represented everything the financial world admired. He had built one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the country through relentless discipline, fearless decisions, and an almost impossible standard of excellence. His charcoal suit fit with effortless precision. A Swiss watch rested beneath the cuff of his crisp white shirt. He walked with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent years entering rooms where everyone else waited for his opinion before speaking. Success had become so ordinary that it no longer impressed him. His assistant, Daniel Foster, had been delayed by an unexpected conference call, leaving Nathaniel alone as he took his usual seat at table 12 beside the rain-covered windows overlooking the city. Claire approached carrying a leather menu and a glass of sparkling water. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks. Welcome back." Her voice was warm, without being overly familiar. Nathaniel glanced briefly at her before returning his attention to the messages appearing across his phone. "Thank you." Claire carefully placed the water beside him. "Would you like a few minutes before ordering?" Nathaniel finally looked up. His eyes rested on the white apron, the serving tray, and the name tag pinned neatly to her uniform. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he spoke for words that quietly echoed farther than he intended. "Know your place." The words were calm. They were not shouted. Yet the conversations at nearby tables slowed almost instantly. A businessman lowered his fork. An elderly couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ethan, the youngest busser in the restaurant, froze beside the service station holding a stack of clean plates. Claire met Nathaniel's eyes for only a single heartbeat. There was no anger on her face, no embarrassment, no attempt to defend herself. She simply offered the same professional nod she had given every guest throughout the evening. "Of course, Mr. Brooks," she replied gently before turning away with unhurried grace. Nathaniel believed the moment had ended. He had no idea that before dessert was served, the quiet waitress he had dismissed would teach him a lesson that neither billions of dollars nor decades of success had ever managed to reveal. Daniel Foster entered Hawthorne House almost 20 minutes later, carrying a slim leather portfolio and quietly apologizing to the hostess for the delay. At 36 years old, he had worked beside Nathaniel Brooks long enough to recognize that every minute on his employer's schedule had a purpose. As he approached table 12, several guests nodded politely in Nathaniel's direction before returning to their conversations. No announcement had been made. Yet his presence alone subtly changed the atmosphere inside the restaurant. Waiters adjusted their timing. Managers checked every detail twice. Even seasoned executives dining nearby instinctively lowered their voices as they passed his table. Nathaniel never asked for attention. Years of extraordinary success simply caused it to follow him wherever he went. Daniel placed the portfolio beside Nathaniel's untouched glass of sparkling water. The conference call ended better than expected, he said with a relieved smile. The board approved tomorrow's acquisition. Nathaniel gave a brief nod. Good. Daniel noticed the menu still lying unopened. You have not ordered yet? Nathaniel glanced toward the dining room before answering. Not yet. Daniel followed his gaze and saw Claire Bennett speaking softly with an elderly couple near the fireplace. She patiently explained the evening's specials, answering every question without rushing them despite the crowded dining room. She seems familiar, Daniel observed. Nathaniel replied almost absent-mindedly. She is our server. Daniel smiled. She looks remarkably composed for a place this busy. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched Claire thank the elderly couple before walking toward another table where a businessman had accidentally dropped his reading glasses beneath his chair. Without interrupting anyone's conversation, Claire quietly retrieved them, wiped away a small fingerprint with a clean linen cloth, and returned them with a warm smile. The businessman looked genuinely grateful. Daniel noticed Nathaniel continuing to watch. Everything all right? He asked. Nathaniel finally leaned back in his chair. Tell me something. Daniel waited. Have you ever formed an opinion about someone in less than 10 seconds? Daniel laughed softly. Every day? Usually at airports. Nathaniel allowed himself the smallest smile. And how often were you wrong? Daniel considered the question more carefully than expected. More often than I like to admit. Nathaniel looked through the rain-covered window toward the city lights shimmering across the wet streets. Interesting. Before Daniel could ask another question, Claire approached the table carrying fresh bread and warm butter. Her expression remained exactly as calm as it had been throughout the evening. Good evening, she said pleasantly. Would either of you care to hear today's chef's recommendations? Daniel thanked her politely. Nathaniel looked up for a brief moment, expecting perhaps the slightest trace of resentment after their earlier exchange. Instead, Claire spoke to him with the same professional courtesy she had shown every guest in the restaurant. There was no coldness in her voice, no hidden sarcasm, no attempt to remind him of what had happened. She simply treated him with quiet respect. After Claire stepped away, Daniel raised one eyebrow. Excellent service. Nathaniel nodded almost unconsciously. Yes. Daniel opened the portfolio and began reviewing financial projections, but Nathaniel's attention drifted once more across the dining room. He noticed something he had never paid attention to before. Claire never appeared hurried, yet she somehow anticipated what people needed before they asked. A fresh cup of coffee arrived moments before it became empty. A forgotten umbrella was waiting by the front door before its owner remembered leaving it behind. A nervous young couple celebrating what appeared to be an engagement relaxed after only a few reassuring words from her. Nathaniel had spent decades believing exceptional performance could always be measured with numbers, reports, and profits. Yet as he quietly observed the waitress moving gracefully through the crowded restaurant, he began wondering whether the rarest kind of excellence could exist without demanding recognition at all. The evening continued with the smooth rhythm expected from one of Manhattan's finest restaurants until an unexpected problem quietly threatened to unravel months of careful planning. In the private dining room beyond the main hall, a charitable foundation was preparing to host an intimate fundraising dinner attended by respected judges, physicians, business leaders, and longtime benefactors. The guests had already begun arriving when Olivia Carter received an anxious call through her headset. A shipment delay had left several personalized place cards missing, and two of the evening's honored guests had been seated according to an outdated arrangement that ignored important family relationships. It was the kind of mistake that could embarrass both the hosts and the restaurant within minutes. Olivia moved quickly toward the private room, studying the revised seating chart with growing concern. We only have a few minutes, one coordinator whispered. If we move people now, someone is going to notice. Claire had been passing the entrance carrying a tray of coffee when she noticed the worried expressions. She did not interrupt. She quietly waited until Olivia looked up. May I see the seating chart? Olivia handed it to her without hesitation. Claire studied the names for less than a minute before looking around the room. Dr. Eleanor Hayes should sit beside Judge Richard Whitmore, she said calmly. They have supported the Literacy Foundation together for years. Mr. and Mrs. Langley recently became grandparents. They would enjoy sitting near the young family from Boston. If we exchange tables 3 and 5, every guest will still have the correct meal selection, and no one will realize the adjustment happened tonight. The coordinator blinked in surprise. How do you know all of that? Claire smiled gently. People usually tell you what matters to them if you truly listen. Olivia did not waste another second. Do it. Within moments, the staff quietly adjusted the room. Fresh place cards were rewritten in elegant handwriting. Chairs were repositioned while guests admired artwork along the walls. Conversation never stopped. No confusion spread across the room. By the time the final attendees entered, everything appeared perfectly planned. Standing just outside the doorway, Nathaniel had witnessed nearly the entire sequence while waiting for Daniel to finish an important phone call. He had expected panic. Instead, he had watched one waitress solve a complicated social puzzle with remarkable composure. Did that just happen? Daniel asked as he returned. Nathaniel nodded slowly. She fixed it. Olivia approached Claire after the guests were comfortably seated. You saved the evening, she said quietly. Claire shook her head with a modest smile. Everyone helped. Olivia laughed softly. Most people would have wanted credit. Claire carefully straightened a centerpiece that had shifted slightly during the rearrangement. The guests came here to support a good cause. They should remember the evening, not the problem. Nathaniel heard every word. Something about that answer stayed with him far longer than he expected. Throughout his career, he had watched executives compete for recognition over projects completed by entire teams. Promotions often followed visibility rather than quiet contribution. Yet here stood someone who had solved a potentially embarrassing situation without asking for acknowledgement, praise, or gratitude. As dinner resumed, Nathaniel found his attention drifting away from financial projections and toward the woman moving quietly between tables in her black uniform and white apron. She did not appear extraordinary because she demanded attention. She appeared extraordinary because she never needed it. For the first time in many years, Nathaniel began to question whether the most valuable people in any room were often the ones everyone else had learned to overlook. Dinner service settled into an easy rhythm once again, and the private fundraising event unfolded as though every detail had been planned months in advance. Soft conversations filled the elegant room while candlelight danced across polished crystal glasses. Claire Bennett moved quietly from table to table with her familiar grace, never lingering long enough to draw attention to herself. To every guest, she offered the same gentle courtesy, whether they were celebrated philanthropists or first-time visitors. Nathaniel Brooks found himself observing her more closely than the financial reports resting untouched beside his plate. It was no longer curiosity alone. It was the uncomfortable realization that every passing minute seemed to challenge the opinion he had formed within seconds of meeting her. As the first course concluded, Judge Richard Whitmore slowly stood to stretch his legs before speaking with several guests across the room. Claire noticed immediately that the elderly judge's cane had been left leaning against his chair. Without interrupting anyone's conversation, she carried it to him before he had taken more than a few careful steps. Judge Whitmore smiled with genuine appreciation. You remember every little detail, do not you? Claire smiled warmly. The little details usually matter the most. The judge chuckled softly. Your memory continues to embarrass mine. Nathaniel watched the exchange from across the dining room. The warmth between them suggested they had met many times before. A few minutes later, Dr. Eleanor Hayes approached the dessert table while speaking with another guest. She paused the moment she noticed Claire arranging fresh flowers beside the coffee station. Claire, she said with unmistakable delight, I have been hoping you would be working tonight. Claire greeted her with the same calm smile she offered everyone else. It is wonderful to see you again, Dr. Hayes. How is your granddaughter enjoying college? Dr. Hayes laughed with pleasant surprise. She just finished her first semester with honors. I cannot believe you remembered. Claire's expression remained humble. You spoke about her with such pride last year. Some conversations deserve to stay with us. Nathaniel slowly lowered the coffee cup in his hand. Daniel noticed the subtle change in his expression. What is it? He asked quietly. Nathaniel answered without taking his eyes off Claire. Everyone seems to know her. Daniel looked around the room and realized Nathaniel was right. Guests from different tables greeted Claire by name. Some asked about her family. Others thanked her for recommendations she had made during previous visits. She was not simply serving dinner. She had quietly become part of countless meaningful memories without ever placing herself at the center of them. Olivia passed beside Nathaniel's table, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. "She has that effect on people," Olivia said after noticing where he was looking. Nathaniel turned toward her. "How long has she worked here?" "Nearly 6 years," Olivia replied proudly. "I have offered her promotions more than once." Nathaniel seemed surprised. "She declined?" Olivia nodded. "Every single time." "Why?" Nathaniel asked. Olivia smiled thoughtfully before answering. "She once told me that leadership is not always about standing above people. Sometimes it is about making every person who walks through the door feel like they matter." Olivia excused herself and continued serving guests, leaving Nathaniel unusually quiet. He looked once more toward Claire as she helped an elderly couple put on their coats before thanking them sincerely for spending the evening at Hawthorne House. There was no audience applauding her kindness, no camera recording her actions. She behaved exactly the same whether anyone noticed or not. For a man who had spent decades believing achievement was measured by visibility, the quiet waitress was revealing a completely different definition of success, one thoughtful moment at a time. The final guests lingered over coffee while the gentle rain outside faded into a light mist that shimmered beneath the city lights. Inside Hawthorne House, the evening had settled into the kind of peaceful rhythm that only arrived after excellent service and meaningful conversation. Claire Bennett quietly collected empty dessert plates from the private dining room, thanking each guest with the same warmth she had offered since the beginning of her shift. She neither hurried nor slowed her pace. Every movement reflected quiet confidence rather than obligation. Nathaniel Brooks watched from across the dining room as though seeing the restaurant through completely different eyes than when he had first arrived. The financial documents resting beside him had not been opened for nearly half an hour. Numbers that usually demanded his full attention suddenly felt far less interesting than the people moving around him. Judge Richard Whitmore slowly approached Claire before preparing to leave. "Young lady," he said with a warm smile, "I hope you realize that every time my wife and I visited this restaurant before she passed away, you remembered exactly how she liked her tea. Even during the months when her memory was fading, yours never did." Claire's smile softened with quiet compassion. "She always enjoyed extra lemon," Claire replied gently. She said it reminded her of summers in Maine. The elderly judge lowered his eyes for a brief moment before smiling again. "You remembered something even I nearly forgot," Claire answered softly. "Some memories deserve someone willing to carry them." Nathaniel heard every word. He looked toward Daniel, who had also fallen completely silent. Neither man interrupted the moment. Dr. Eleanor Hayes stepped forward next, placing a gentle hand on Claire's shoulder. "Do you know why so many of us keep coming back here?" she asked, glancing towards several longtime guests standing nearby. Claire smiled politely. "Because the chef is excellent?" The group laughed quietly. Dr. Hayes shook her head. "The food brings people in once. You make them return." Claire looked almost embarrassed by the compliment. "I simply try to be kind," Dr. Hayes answered with quiet certainty. "You do much more than that. You make people feel remembered." Nathaniel slowly stood from his chair. He walked toward Claire with measured steps, causing several nearby conversations to gradually fade as guests noticed the movement. Daniel remained a respectful distance behind him. Claire turned as Nathaniel approached, meeting his eyes with the same calm expression she had shown throughout the evening. For a long moment, he searched for words that carried enough honesty to replace the ones he wished he had never spoken. "Miss Bennett," he began quietly. "Earlier this evening I believed I understood your place because of the uniform you wear." He paused before continuing. "I was completely wrong." Claire listened without interruption. Nathaniel drew a slow breath. "I judged you before I knew anything about your character. I confused your profession with your value. That was unfair, and I sincerely apologize." The restaurant remained peacefully still, not from shock, but from respect for an unusually genuine moment. Claire smiled with quiet grace. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." Nathaniel seemed surprised by how simply she accepted his apology. "You are willing to forgive me that easily?" Claire looked toward the rain-speckled windows before answering. Respect grows faster when someone is willing to admit they were mistaken. Holding on to resentment would not improve either of our lives. Nathaniel lowered his head slightly, a gesture almost no one in the room had ever witnessed from him. In that quiet moment, he understood something years of success had never taught him. Wealth could open almost any door, but humility was the only key capable of opening a human heart. Claire excused herself with her familiar gentle smile and returned to helping the remaining guests, while Nathaniel remained standing in thoughtful silence, realizing that the greatest lesson of his evening had been delivered not from a boardroom podium, but by a waitress wearing a simple white apron. The dining room gradually returned to its gentle rhythm, yet something had quietly changed in the atmosphere. The elegant restaurant looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Crystal chandeliers still reflected across polished marble floors. Soft piano melodies still drifted through the room. Guests still enjoyed coffee and conversation. But for Nathaniel Brooks, nothing felt quite the same anymore. He returned to his table, yet the untouched acquisition documents no longer held his attention. Daniel watched his employer carefully. In nearly 8 years of working together, he had witnessed Nathaniel negotiate billion-dollar agreements without showing hesitation. Tonight was different. The man sitting across from him appeared thoughtful in a way Daniel had never seen before. "You are unusually quiet," Daniel observed with a small smile. Nathaniel looked through the rain-speckled window before answering. "I spent years believing I could judge people within moments." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Most successful executives think they can." Nathaniel slowly nodded. "Perhaps that is why we are wrong more often than we realize." Before Daniel could respond, Claire passed nearby carrying a fresh pot of coffee. She paused beside an elderly woman seated alone near the fireplace. Without being asked, Claire quietly refilled the cup, then noticed the woman searching inside her handbag with growing concern. "Did you misplace something?" Claire asked gently. The woman smiled with slight embarrassment. "My reading glasses. I cannot seem to find them." Claire looked toward the window, then toward the chair where the woman had placed her folded umbrella. A moment later, she reached beneath the umbrella and carefully picked up the missing glasses. "I believe these were waiting for you," she said with a warm smile. The woman laughed with relief. "You noticed before I did." Claire simply replied. "Sometimes people only need someone willing to pay attention." Nathaniel watched the exchange without saying a word. It was another small moment. Another kindness that required no audience. Another reminder that greatness often appeared in forms the world rarely celebrated. As the remaining guests prepared to leave, Olivia Carter gathered the evening staff near the entrance for a brief, closing conversation. Nathaniel happened to overhear part of it while collecting his coat. "Excellent work tonight, everyone," Olivia said proudly, especially during the seating changes. Ethan immediately looked toward Claire. "She deserves the credit," he said. Several employees nodded in agreement. Claire smiled and gently shook her head. The evening belonged to the entire team. Olivia laughed softly. "You never let anyone praise you for very long." Claire answered with quiet sincerity. "The work matters more than the recognition." Nathaniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Those simple words reminded him of something he had almost forgotten from the earliest days of building his company, before titles, awards, and magazine covers had slowly replaced the quiet satisfaction of simply doing meaningful work. As Claire walked toward the kitchen carrying the last serving tray of the evening, Daniel spoke quietly beside him. "You know, most people would have remembered your apology for the rest of their lives." Nathaniel looked toward Claire disappearing through the swinging kitchen doors. "She probably already forgot it." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Not because it was unimportant, because she seems far more interested in helping the next person than replaying the last disappointment." A few minutes later, Claire returned with neatly folded linens, paused to straighten a slightly crooked picture frame near the entrance, then held the front door open for an elderly couple leaving beneath the fading rain. They thanked her warmly. She smiled exactly as she had smiled all evening. No more, no less. Nathaniel finally understood that genuine dignity did not appear only during extraordinary moments. It quietly revealed itself through ordinary choices repeated day after day. Standing beneath the warm lights of Hawthorne House, he realized the most remarkable person he had met that year had never tried to impress anyone at all. The last guests slowly made their way toward the entrance as the evening drew to a peaceful close. Rainwater still glistened along the sidewalks outside, reflecting the golden lights of Manhattan like scattered stars across the pavement. Inside Hawthorne House, chairs were quietly returned beneath polished tables, fresh linens were folded with practiced hands, and the soft melody from the piano came to a graceful end. Claire Bennett carried a small stack of dessert plates toward the kitchen before returning with a clean cloth to wipe the final table of the night. She completed every task with the same care she had shown when the restaurant had been full. Whether serving hundreds of guests or preparing an empty room for tomorrow, her standard never changed. Nathaniel Brooks remained standing near the entrance instead of leaving with Daniel. His driver had already brought the black sedan to the curb, yet several minutes passed without Nathaniel taking a single step toward the waiting car. His attention remained fixed on Claire as she quietly thanked the kitchen staff, wished Ethan a safe trip home, and complimented a young hostess on how confidently she had handled the busy evening. None of the employees realized Nathaniel was listening. "She encourages everyone," Daniel observed softly. Nathaniel nodded, without expecting anything in return. A few moments later, Olivia approached Claire carrying a small envelope. "This came for you earlier today," she said. "I almost forgot." Claire opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten thank you note from a family who had celebrated their daughter's recovery from a serious illness at the restaurant several weeks earlier. There was no money inside, no expensive gift, only a photograph of the smiling family gathered around the dinner table and a simple message thanking Claire for making their celebration feel unforgettable. Claire looked at the picture for a long moment before gently placing it back into the envelope. "I am glad they are doing well," she said quietly. Olivia smiled. "You keep every letter, do not you?" Claire nodded with quiet pride. "On difficult days, they remind me why kindness always matters." Nathaniel felt those words settle deeply within him. Throughout his career, he had filled offices with awards, framed magazine covers, and trophies celebrating financial success. Yet somehow a simple handwritten note seemed more valuable than all of them combined. He walked toward Claire one final time before leaving. "Miss Bennett," he said warmly. Claire looked up with the same calm smile. "Yes, Mr. Brooks?" Nathaniel reached into his jacket and removed an elegant business card. "Earlier, I offered an apology. Tonight, I would also like to offer an opportunity. If you should ever decide your path leads somewhere new, my door will always be open." Claire accepted the card respectfully, but looked at it only briefly before placing it carefully inside her apron pocket. "Thank you," she replied sincerely. "That is very generous." Nathaniel waited, almost expecting her to ask about the position or the salary. She asked neither. Instead, she smiled gently and added, "Wherever I work, I hope I never stop treating people the way they deserve to be treated." Nathaniel returned her smile. "After tonight, I believe you never will." They shook hands with quiet mutual respect. There was no applause, no dramatic announcement, no audience celebrating the moment. Only two people who now understood one another far better than when the evening had begun. As Claire returned to her closing duties and Nathaniel stepped toward the waiting car, both carried something home that could not be measured, purchased, or displayed. Claire carried the same quiet dignity she had possessed all along. Nathaniel carried a new understanding that the highest position a person could ever hold was not found on an organizational chart, but in the character they chose to demonstrate when no one expected anything from them. Several weeks passed, and life quietly continued for everyone who had shared that rainy evening at Hawthorne House. Manhattan remained as restless as ever, with crowded sidewalks, endless meetings, and ambitious people chasing the next opportunity. Yet for Nathaniel Brooks, something had changed in a way no quarterly report could measure. Every morning before the first executive meeting, he found himself remembering a simple sentence spoken by a waitress in a white apron. "Real success helps other people stand beside you." The words had settled into his thinking more deeply than any leadership seminar or business book ever had. On the first Monday of the following month, senior executives gathered inside the glass-walled boardroom at Brooks Capital, expecting another discussion about acquisitions and market expansion. Instead, Nathaniel began the meeting differently. He looked around the table before speaking. "Before we discuss numbers, I want to change something about how we lead this company." The room became quiet. Every employee deserves to be treated with the same respect we offer our largest clients. Titles describe responsibilities. They do not determine human worth. Several executives exchanged thoughtful glances. Daniel smiled quietly, already knowing where those words had been born. Over the following weeks, small changes spread throughout the company. Managers spent more time listening before making decisions. Junior employees were invited to share ideas during meetings. Receptionists, maintenance staff, assistants, and interns discovered that the chief executive officer now greeted them by name whenever possible. None of those changes appeared in financial headlines, yet they gradually transformed the culture of the organization. One Friday evening, after another long week, Nathaniel asked his driver to make an unexpected stop. The black sedan pulled gently to the curb outside Hawthorne House. The familiar golden lights still welcomed guests through the tall windows, and soft piano music drifted into the cool evening air whenever the entrance opened. Nathaniel stepped inside without reservation or announcement. Olivia recognized him immediately and smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks." "Good evening," he replied. "Is Claire working tonight?" Olivia nodded toward the dining room. "She is serving near the windows." Claire looked up as Nathaniel approached. Her expression brightened with the same calm warmth she offered every guest. "Welcome back," she said. "It is nice to see you again." Nathaniel smiled sincerely. "The pleasure is mine." There was no awkwardness between them anymore, because nothing remained unsettled. Claire escorted him to his table, placed a glass of sparkling water beside him, and handed him the menu with the same professionalism she had shown on every previous visit. This time, however, Nathaniel noticed details he had ignored before. He thanked her before she poured his water. He listened without interruption as she described the evening's specials. When she walked away, he quietly folded the menu and watched the dining room with completely different eyes. He no longer saw waiters, bussers, hosts, or managers separated by status. He saw people whose work made countless evenings meaningful for strangers they would probably never meet again. As dinner came to an end, Nathaniel left a handwritten note beneath the check before quietly walking toward the exit. After he had gone, Claire unfolded the small card. It contained only one sentence. "Thank you for reminding me that character always sits at the head of the table." Claire smiled softly before placing the note inside the same envelope that held letters from grateful families and longtime guests. She did not keep it because it came from a billionaire. She kept it because it represented a heart willing to change. Outside, the city continued moving beneath countless lights, unaware that one quiet conversation inside a restaurant had reshaped the way a powerful man would treat people for the rest of his life. Sometimes the greatest victories leave no headlines, attract no applause, and earn no trophies. They simply remind ordinary people that every human being deserves dignity before judgment, kindness before assumption, and respect before recognition.